So besides trial, not being, not coercing somebody, not torturing somebody, what else would it mean for that individual that's been charged with first-degree murder?
So yeah, what I wanted to say also, what is pretty funny actually, that in Germany, a defendant is allowed to lie in court, right? That's very different from the US, as far as I know, right? You are allowed to lie in court to the judge and to anyone. That's not illegal. That's not a new crime. In the US, it would be considered a new crime, right?
Yep. Yeah.
You are allowed to lie to the police as a suspect, right? If you're not, the only exception is you cannot falsely accuse someone else, right? Or help someone else to get away with a crime. That's not allowed. But you can lie about your participation, what you did, what you didn't do, right? There's a big difference between the US and in Europe. Also, it's legal in Germany to escape from prison and to help someone else in prison to escape from prison. That's not a crime.
Really?
So yes, so when you get caught, you will not face a new trial because of that. So that's not a new crime, right? It's surprising. It's surprising, yeah. Also, you have the right to refuse to testify against your fiance, not only your spouse, right? And as we know, like to say that's my fiance is, you don't have to prove anything, right? Because there is not a legal procedure you have to do. Right? So you can easily say, instead of boyfriend, girlfriend, you can call someone your fiance, and then you don't have to testify as a witness in court.
Yeah. So I know we're going into on a different direction, but I like the direction we're going in. I'm curious about something. One of the things that I've been doing a little bit more research on, and we're getting ready to produce a lot of content on this, is Miranda rights, right? So you just said you can lie to police as long as you're not falsely accusing somebody else, or as long as you're not trying to help somebody else get away with a crime, right? But other than that, you can lie to them about your own involvement in any potential or possible crime. So here in the US, we have, our Fifth Amendment right to remain silent and Miranda rights and all that. But as you know, Miranda rights are not really what people think they are. I mean, there's tons of loopholes, right? And police officers are able to successfully circumvent Miranda rights in so many different ways. And there's tons of case law throughout the country, just different techniques that have been used in different states. But I'm wondering, is there something similar to Miranda rights?
Yes, we have exactly the same. So we have the defendant is allowed to remain silent, right, during any step of the trial, even an investigation already, in a police investigation. You have the right to remain silent, and everything that you say can and will be used against you in court, right? So everything you don't say, they're practically, like on paper, you cannot, the police officer cannot use it against you, right? But what happens in reality is, if you don't have a defense attorney, and you exercise your right to remain silent, there are some tendencies that say that at least it will be in the report. You didn't say anything, right? You didn't have a defense attorney that taught you so. So that should mean something, right? That you didn't, that you actively, refuse to collaborate. If you have a defense attorney, that's, even better, because they can, fight against the law enforcement and the, everything that has been done by law enforcement. So what is also a very, very important thing for a suspect when they're first getting investigated is that you have to be read your rights, right, before knowing if you're a witness or a suspect. So if that hasn't happened and you get a defense attorney, that's the first thing that we will, fight in court. And then whatever you said cannot be used against you. Right. So if the police officers, they sometimes forget, they sometimes are in a rush, they sometimes are not motivated, right? And they forget to read your rights fully, that you have a right to a defense attorney, you have the right to remain silent, all these things. And also, what are you actually charged with, right? Why is the police investigating, right? And are you a witness, or are you already a suspect? If that's not exactly how it should be, right, in the protocol, that's the first thing that, it gets pretty much smashed in court, right? It's the first thing, and they cannot have a second chance about that. So whatever you said, probably admitted something in the beginning, cannot be used against you.
Now, here's something interesting that I mean, you touched on so many interesting points. I could tell that we're gonna have probably 20 parts to this series, because there's so many different things that you've touched on that I think are fascinating, and I think we could really dive into. But one thing that just the very last thing you said right now, you said that, you know, if they violated that person's rights, that you can keep that out. Now, here in the US, you know, you have Miranda rights, and you have all this body of law that is, you know, kind of been has you know, that has come from that, right, in every single state. But as you know, there's exceptions and exceptions to the exceptions, and you know, it just keeps going and going and going, to where it's quite common for somebody's Miranda rights, right, just for the average person, they look at it like, oh, that's a clear Miranda violation. But there's all these exceptions, and then there's so much interpretation, and there's so much discretion for judges, so that what ultimately ends up happening is that a lot of times all that stuff comes in anyways. Is it like that in Germany? Can you expand on that just a little bit?
Well, it always depends on, you know, what did you say in the first place, right? And can that be removed? Can that be, you know, corrected afterwards, right? Because in some situations you might be, you know, overwhelmed with the situation. You want to say something. You don't want to completely remain silent, right? Even if you know you should never talk to the police in the first place until you get a defense attorney, right? That is, you know, like stepping in and is, you know, telling you what to say and what not to say. You might say something just because you're stressed or nervous, right? And as I said, if there are formal mistakes, right, by the law enforcement, then you have a very good chance of removing that. Now, if they did everything correct by the protocol, it's very hard to get that ever removed, you know. So the judge will hold it against you. The prosecutor will hold it against you, right? It's for a defense attorney almost impossible when everything was correct, you know, in the protocol. And especially if law enforcement, there were at least 2 police officers that witness each other's statements, for example, right? Because it's like in most cases, it's not only one police officer. So they will back each other up, and you have probably no chance to prove that, you know, you wasn't treated the correct way.
Right. Do they have body cam footage? And do the police officers have body cam footage over in Germany?
No. So we had the pilot project in Hamburg, right? In the north of Germany, we had that, but it hasn't been established in the police force. So it's you will not find it, right? We don't have body cam. We also what they use in the cars is, you know, the camera in the car itself, but yeah, so no body cam, so not a lot of proof actually if you know, there's one defendant, one police officer. What is also very interesting, what I see in Florida, is a lot of police officers or female officers are driving by themselves. So that's not allowed in Germany. You always have to be at least 2. You cannot be on duty alone. It's one aspect that, you know, is for protection of the you know, officer, but also a big part is to prove actually what happened. Right.
Interesting. You also mentioned a couple times about counsel being provided. That's interesting. So it's similar to the US, where counsel is provided if it can, you know, if you cannot afford one. Can you speak to that a little bit? I'd love to know kind of how that differs from the system here in the US.
Yes. So the suspect is, as soon as you're getting arrested, right, or as soon as you're subject to investigation, you have to be read your rights, that you are allowed to appoint, like to call your own defense attorney that you want to, right? In the case you don't have one and you say, like, I don't have one, I need one, right? The police has to give you at least a list of you know, public defenders, right? And you can call them through, right? If you say I cannot afford it, right? I cannot afford to pay it myself, then the court will appoint a public defender for you, right? But it's in most cases it's just the fact that they get paid by the court, right? Same as in the US, and it makes it almost impossible for them to be highly motivated or to be extremely ambitious about the case, because the fees that they can actually charge, which is said, are low compared to, you know, what they charge when they're a chosen counsel for a case.
Right, right. And do the public defenders there in Germany, like, what's the general kind of reputation, like generally speaking? Because here in the US, like, as you know, right, they have the reputation that they're not as good, they don't work as hard, they're really more like horse traders. What's the reputation of public defenders in Germany? I'm curious.
So in Germany, we don't have the separation of public defender and defense attorney. So every defense attorney can and usually is a public defender for certain cases. So the thing is that the court has a list of all the defense attorneys, right? You know, attorneys that are specialists in criminal law, and there's a list, and you can you know, provide to the court your contact information and say, I am, you know, available for being a public defender. You know, it's not usually every case. It's, you know, once a month or you know, twice a month. And you can say you're available for those cases too, but you can, usually you're a criminal defense attorney, so you have a lot of other cases, right, that you're willingly taking on. So it's not only what the court is providing you. So I know in the US, it's like, if you're a public defender, you're a public defender. You're usually not you know, a criminal defense attorney choosing his or her own cases, right?
That's interesting. I like that system. And given that we're talking about trials and that kind of thing right now, I'm curious, in Germany, if somebody takes a case to trial, is it going to be a bench trial? Is it a jury trial? Do they get to decide? How many people are in the jury, right? Compared to here in the US, I'd love to know that.
So we do not have any jury trial at all.
Oh.
So there's no grand jury, right? We don't have anything like that. The only country, if I'm not mistaken, is the UK in Europe, right? It still has a jury system, because we don't have the common law system. We have civil law system. That means every case is decided by a judge, at least one judge, and it depends on the, you know, on the gravity of the crime or the felony, right? The more severe it is, the more judges we have. So we can have one judge. We can also, for example, like murder would have 3 judges, right? By profession. So it's also interesting, you know, to hear your point of view. Would that be fairer, or would that be actually, you know, lead to more wrong verdicts? Because yeah, exactly.
Well, and you're asking me that's exactly the question I was going to ask you.
Yes, because so for one example would be to say people like 12 people, right, the grand jury, who are not legal professionals, right, who are not trained in the law, they are deciding over someone's future or even over someone's death in the worst case, right? In some states, it's about the death penalty. So is that fairer? Like, I have a hard time believing that, if it's fair, right? Because if you're a suspect in a crime, in a case, right, in criminal law, then if not a legal professional is deciding over that, right? Because it's about the law, it's about like all these little details that matter, right? Someone that is not trained can easily be persuaded, convinced, manipulated by either the prosecutor or the defense attorney, right? Emotions play a big role. Emotions and, you know, credibility of someone. Do I like the person's face or not? Do I like the person's background? Like, of course you're allowed to have, you know, a fair jury, but how do you really make sure that you get a fair jury, right? And that no one is, you know, has any prejudice against you. So I believe it's only my personal opinion that you know, having a jury system makes it not fair. Makes it even more, you know, the outcome of the case is depending on, do people like you?
Yeah.
Right? In the end, do people like your attorney?
Right.
Or not? Right? That plays a big role, because we have seen cases in history that a case that was very clear that, you know, you don't have enough evidence, right? It's not beyond a reasonable doubt. And the person was still, got still convicted, right? Because the defense attorney, what he has to do, like what is the goal? He has to present an alternative scenario. That's enough, right? If you just say it could have been someone else because there was not enough evidence for my client, right? That's already enough. You don't have to present someone else. You don't have to present another person to them.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, like, you know, not legal professionals, they do not understand. They say, who else should it have been? Right? They don't understand that you don't have to prove that you're innocent. The government, the prosecutor has to prove that you are guilty.
Yeah.
And it's in so many cases, it's like playing with emotions, right?
No, I agree with you completely. In fact, I have a bunch of content where I talk a little bit about some of the nuances that you just pointed out right there. And I love that you were asking me the same question, because I was actually that you were the first one to vocalize the question, but I was already thinking, oh, I'm about to ask her what's better, what does she think and why? But to answer your question, to answer the same question, I agree with almost everything you said, but I think that because, and I'm a little more cynical, right? And I'm a little more cynical, and even though I agree with most of what you said, where the judges are definitely more experienced in the law, they're a little bit less susceptible to emotion. But my concern is that, and I don't know how it is in Germany, right? How judges are selected, and maybe that could be the next thing we address. But I know that I've seen, right? I've seen this numerous times, and I talk to this, where judges can also be very biased, right? Judges, they're human beings, and there's a lot of injustices that have taken place, big cases, right, throughout history, here U.S. history, where a judge was in big part to blame for a wrongful conviction, a wrongful execution, when the stakes are super high, when it's a life sentence or when somebody's going to be executed, right? And judges sometimes are behind those bad decisions. Now, if you get 3 judges, there's arguably a better chance that won't happen. But at the same time, if they're buddies, they know each other, they hang out together, right? They see each other at all these social events. There's also they're human, right? So there's also that component where if one of them is among them 3 is the alpha, right? It could be man or woman, but the alpha, the leader of those 3, because of their social kind of interactions and social outside the court type relationships, it would be very easy for the other 2 judges or one of those, right, to maybe have some doubts or reservations, but because of his relationship to that other judge, he could easily buckle, just like any human being might. Now, that's not to say that would always happen, but the risk is there. If you ask me for my opinion, I think, and I'm thinking outside the box and kind of going against the grain here, but I think with all the new technology that's come out with AI, I think that there's a way that we might be able to use AI together with a human component, right? Because you still need the human component to be able to arrive at better verdicts, right? So, because, you know, I mean, there's just tons of stuff. I'm still learning about what's all out there, right, with regard to AI. But, you know, AI can record everything, it can synthesize information, it can listen to changes in somebody's voice, right? Because sometimes there's, and like, for example, it can read, you can have a camera on the person's face reading their retina to see if they're lying or they're being honest. And you don't have that be necessarily 10% or 20% of the component in AI making a decision, but maybe it's a 3%, right? Like their eyes. And maybe their micro expressions is another 3%, right? And you would have to have tons of data, right, to back this up. So, and maybe you'd have to input into AI, hey, this is a Hispanic man from, Los Angeles. And because of that, you're going to have to, the micro expression database you're going to have to pull from is a little bit different because his expressions are going to be different, right? Or this is an Asian man from, from the Philippines, and culturally, these are what their micro expressions are, and this is what it means. But you don't have that be, for example, like I said, a big component of guilty or not guilty, right? But just a small percentage, and then a deep analysis into the evidence that's presented, and also the voice, right? Listen to the frequency of the voice and analyze that, compare that throughout a whole trial, right? Because if you haven't testified, you have a lot of data there. if there's, police interviews that come into, get admitted at trial, you can compare the voice frequency there. And so, I don't know, it's a crazy idea, but I think maybe AI maybe is the solution.
Yeah, but what's the problem with AI? I didn't want to, you cut you off, but the problem with AI is that AI will not be able to do the thinking process. So that's a very important part of, finding a verdict. It's either the jury that has to, unanimously, right, with one voice say, what they are deciding on, right, guilty or not guilty. And then the judge who makes the decision about, the range actually of, the consequences, right? So the thinking process is only be done by a human brain. So AI will, what AI is good for, it gives you answers. It gives you, maybe standard answers, maybe not, right? Unbiased, hopefully, but it only gives you those answers that were previously fed by human brains into the computer, right? AI is not creating anything completely new, right? AI cannot think. So that's the problem with AI, right? To replace, the law system, right? Or, courts with AI will not work because of every case is different, right? I mean, we have the law, but still every case has a lot of different details, right? And has a lot of different nuances. So you cannot put AI in place because AI will give you what history has fed into the system.
Yeah, so I agree with the input, right? And I thought about that, the input of the data, because we have that problem here in Utah, right? Where, like, just to give you an example, like to be able to get a jury panel, right? You have to, you have to call in, let's say it's a first degree murder, you have to call in 100 people, 120, whatever it is. And quite often what happens is that the people that show up, they're not very diverse, right? Even though the community here is diverse, the people that get called in, it's not very diverse. And that's definitely something that, it's been fought a little bit before. It's never been taken to the US Supreme Court. But the argument that Utah has is they say, well, wait a minute, we use this method and it's AI, it's just generated, right? But the problem is in the way that it's programmed, right? Like the programming in itself. So, and that's not to say, by the way, just to make clear, you could have a jury that's not diverse and still be fair, right? So, but the reason I bring that up as an example is because you're talking about the inputting of the information. So I think that there is definitely something that needs to be explored a little bit more. As far as like how the thinking part of it, my thinking was it would be a combination, right, of human and AI, and one, maybe if it someday heads in that direction, we'll find out if it's a good system or a better system or not. But if, for example, if at the end of a trial, right, because you can, like, it's so much more advanced now, right? You can put in all of the code, right, all of the statutes in that state, and it'll synthesize it, it'll analyze it. And then you could feed all the jury instructions, and then it could probably come up with some synthesis at the end of a trial where it gives you likelihood that this person or that this evidence, blah, 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 and start giving you statistics and numbers, and maybe have a professional, like a professional, I'm not going to say judge, but have a professional, trained professional that could probably look at that data and make a decision based on that data. And maybe not even just one person, maybe you have 3 people, 3 professionals, and they all independently have to make a decision, right? Without being next to each other. That peer pressure,